Remy Super 3, Blue Nocturne, is honestly one of the worst supers in the entire franchise.
The readily apparent uselessness of S3 stands out even among the other bad supers
Is
in the game.
unbelievably
Really terrible design.
Super 3.
Remy's pretty mediocre.
This Third Strike tutorial will cover Remy's Super Art 3. Often considered the weakest super, due to its perceived lack of practical application, this tutorial aims to convince you to discard the Remy detractor propaganda, and perhaps give it a second look.
Blue Nocturne sucks.
Blue Nocturne sucks. What can I say?
Let's start with the technical details.
Well, where do I begin? Remy's third super is actually a counter super. The few places where Blue Nocturne can actually do some work, SA2 also works. Every time you do this super, on the first frame it will freeze the screen, allowing opponents to see you've just activated Blue Nocturne. You need to do Blue Nocturne on the pair that they're about to attack. Depending on what you're countering, this window might only be a few frames wide even if you know exactly when it's coming. Which of course you won't.
The most consistent way to land Blue Nocturne is to exploit option select parries. That's when your opponent does a quick parry, usually immediately followed by a poke or throw at closer ranges. You've probably seen mid-tier players looking like they're teabagging, trying to abuse the technique, but at high level, OS parries are disguised in almost every action. First, attack with a cancelable normal, preferably a mid-attack as it will increase the chances of activating your opponent's parry. Secondly, slow buffer the double quarter circle motion during the normal attack animation. If a parry is triggered, the cancelable frames will be frozen, allowing you time to visually confirm the parry. Once you have confirmed the parry, finish the super motion and piano your kicks to activate Blue Nocturne. If the opponent is buffering a normal from the parry, they will activate the Blue Nocturne counter. This is commonly seen when people miss a hit confirm super attempt and mistake the parry for a hit. The difference here is that we're doing it intentionally. There are many situations in which you can apply this technique. For example, implementing the slow buffer into crouch techs can greatly alleviate throw pressure. A crouch tech is when you press light punch and light kick while crouching, which gets a jab to come out instead of a throw. If timed right, you can tech grabs without the risk of the long throw whiff animation. Crouch techs are commonly baited by OS parries, as the crouching jab, being a mid-attack, is an easy target for parry attempts. Our goal is to make the opponent second guess their autopilot reactions. Yes, they can parry into nothing and wait to get a big punish, but we still have successfully established a deterrent for forced aggression, giving us more breathing room and options for mind games. The parry bait works particularly well on characters who are eager to land a normal that leads to heavy damage, like Oro Close Medium Punch, Dudley Heavy Kick, or Urian with his Crouching Heavy Punch launcher. A quick detail before we move on to the next technique. SGGK is a powerful option select done by performing an option parry, immediately followed by a Kara grab. This will cover the three options of hit, grab, or tech. The first input that is used for the Kara cancel will take priority over the grab if the parry is triggered. This is typically followed by a hit confirm. The strength of SGGK is such that it has become an autopilot response in many players, making it a good example of why Blue Nocturne is so effective as a parry bait. There is one humorous interaction between SGGK and Blue Nocturne. Occasionally, your opponent may want to attempt a Kara grab after a successful parry. Due to the SGGK property, they will need to slightly delay their input to avoid a normal, taking priority over the intended grab. Because inputs are similarly frozen during a super flash, the parry bait SA3 technique effectively extends the window for the SGGK to occur, which leads to the Blue Nocturne counter being triggered if the opponent is not aware of the extra delay. The next essential technique we will discuss is to utilize the long super cancel window from Remy's Fireballs. Remy's Fireballs have the interesting property of being able to cancel into super for nearly the entire animation. Some characters have ways to blow through or otherwise bypass a projectile. For example, Makoto EX Hayate, Dudley ducking maneuvers, or Chun Super Art 2. Similar, but slightly different in execution to the parry bait, after performing a Light of Virtue, immediately start buffering the super motion in anticipation of the oncoming attack. Complete the input into Blue Nocturne once you have made confirmation that the attack is inbound. Your buffer speed may vary based on timing, distance, and character matchup. Keep in mind, this may not always end up being a cancel, especially if they're attacking late in the fireball animation. This super cancel can be done on reaction in most cases. However, it is not always beneficial to start the buffer after every fireball, as it can interfere with your charge. So make sure to learn when and where your opponent is most likely to circumvent a projectile.
You might think this is good against jump-ins, but wrong game, idiot. A lot of people do an empty jump parry, which beats this completely. Okay, but at least if they jump at me, it's a 50-50 if I get it right. Wrong again, idiot, because it doesn't even juggle properly. The issue isn't that it doesn't juggle properly, it's that it doesn't juggle at all. This means the opponent can just parry out and punish you for guessing right.
It is not entirely accurate to say that Blue Nocturne has no use against airborne attacks. It is spacing dependent, but the Blue Nocturne vacuum effect can catch the landing frames of certain locomotion specials, like Urian Knee Drop, or Remy
Cold Blue Kick, which is a move that puts me in the air. If this triggers your counter, you're fucked.
Cold Blue Kick. Unfortunately not the ones that bounce, like Oro's Chicken Stomp, or 12's Dive. It also partially juggles for respectable damage, albeit unsafely, if you manage to catch a jump attack near the final airborne frames. This is best utilized with the super cancel technique just discussed, to cover a bad fireball as a last resort anti-air killing blow. Just be mindful of the spacing. And with that, we have covered the most important routes needed to be effective with Blue Nocturne. Other options can be gimmicky and inconsistent, requiring a strong read on your opponent. If you insist on using it raw, it is possible to Kara cancel into Blue Nocturne using medium punch. Remy's Kara is above average when it comes to distance, so it's possible to Kara super into a poke if your opponent likes to throw them out of range. Now we're getting fancy. This concludes our examination of the practical details. Now, let's move on to the more esoteric and philosophical side of things. One of the tougher aspects of competition is learning to deal with an opponent who completely disregards you, forcing you to earn their respect for the real game to begin. This is especially true with Remy, as it is easy to ignore his defensive options due to the perceived low damage output of the character.
with no regard for human life right now.
No.
Oof.
One of the benefits of picking Blue Nocturne is that it can be used as a tool to make a strong statement that you have the awareness to punish that aggression. And this carries over well past the initial game. The fighting game scene is interesting, in that your reputation will absolutely precede you. A good example of this is how majors post their pool assignments a few weeks before the tournament's start date. You had better believe that everyone in that pool is doing research on each other, searching through old matches on YouTube, checking replays, and stalking their Twitch account. And if you've proven, on record, that you have strong defensive answers, respect is earned, and their mental load will increase on the day of your match. Look no further than the legend of Daigo and the Ume Shoryu.
The beast Umehara, one of the greatest fighting game players to ever grace this earth. And this is his greatest weapon, the Ume Shoryu.
What a first round from Daigo.
If you look at it objectively, it's nothing more than a DP, with unexpected timing meant to steal a turn. It's something anyone with decent intuition could do. But FGC lore has transformed it into a sort of tall tale, and the illustrious nature of the technique will often cause players to freeze up when they encounter Daigo in a bracket. They psych themselves up into believing that a DP is coming at any moment.
Come on, press some buttons, Cole.
Increasing mental load and slowing down their gameplay. And this all happens before the match has even started. This is just one example of how your reputation can influence the game. The opponent's perception of you will dictate their approach. The widespread presumption of Blue Nocturne's weakness gives it a large amount of attention. Its status as a novelty will leave a strong impression on those who fall victim to the supposed joke super. The action sometimes being interpreted as needlessly contemptuous. Some professional athletes have had their entire careers ended as a result of a similar happening. Which brings us to our next point.
Don't be silly. I'm weeping because I want to weep.
I think sometimes people tend to discount the psychological aspect of fighting games. I'd go so far as to say that one's entire personality can be revealed through their gameplay. Considering the choices they make in various situations, or even the way they move their character, Blue Nocturne can be an effective tool in training this type of awareness. You'd be surprised how much information you can glean by physically observing the opponent sitting next to you. As when we see, we take in a whole volume. Nature is volume. But when we have to think, it's one thought after another, linear. And so the process of thought is much slower than the process of seeing, and using our mind or consciousness as a whole. An exasperated sigh, a slump of the shoulders, the increasing impact of one's button presses, or perhaps they have a little swagger in their mannerisms. These are all physical cues you can use to help decipher your opponent's mental state. There is a certain aura you can feel, unfortunately not as perceptible online, but that doesn't mean it's not still present.
Fuck! Shit! I was trying to quit and I couldn't!
This requires a certain effort to make thought keep up with what we are seeing and hearing in the game. Have you ever met a player who stubbornly does wake-up attacks after getting hit by a wake-up themselves? Or how about a player with perfect execution? Setups on point, frame data all pre-computed, but as soon as something goes wrong and the pressure's on, they crumble? It's up to you as a player to expose and exploit these weaknesses. The fact that Blue Nocturne has a reputation as a joke can elicit an emotional response simply by choosing it. In fact, half the matches I've run Blue Nocturne, the opponent instantly locks a suboptimal super for themselves. So right at the character select screen, you've shown me that you had felt something. That sense of strain, the attempt to think about and make sense of what we are feeling, is the ego. And you've tipped your hand that your ego is now at stake. There is an increasing interruption between the experience and the self. This chronic sense of strain is our psychological blocking that seems to divide us from reality. With this in mind, how do you think your opponent is going to react after getting dunked on? How do you think they're going to react after getting dunked on in front of an audience? What would they do to avoid this fate? Personally, that mental game is what attracts me to the fighting genre. It's also very hard to train. I'd say that learning to utilize this super properly really helps to expand your focus and start paying attention to these things. And that's where Blue Nocturne really shines, as a training tool. It's somewhat similar to the design concept of Sean. The limitations of the character force you to focus and get creative to pull out the victory. The short bar for Blue Nocturne means you have to be much more discerning of where you place your EX moves. Most Remis have been guilty of throwing out panic EX fireballs, not having the discipline to use them intelligently in stressful situations. And that's what it's all about: focus and discipline. I'm not necessarily advocating for its use in competitive play. There are a few exceptions I'd make, personally. After all, as we've heard before, there's some overlap between SA2 and Blue Nocturne. All the techniques mentioned here also work for SA2, so it's definitely not a waste to learn them. The fun of Blue Nocturne is how it changes your opponent's behavior, and learning to be more perceptive of those changes. And that's far from useless in my book. Don't let anyone tell you that this or that is trash, don't use it, or pick a top tier. Find out for yourself. Make that knowledge your own.
Alright, we got Remy. Great. Fucking Remy. I hate fighting Remy. It's so boring. It's one of the most boring fights in the fucking game. It's Remy. Seriously, heavy matchup. Can't lie. I seriously can't lie. I think he's done. Yeah, the guy's connection is delayed so he can do pattern shit and I can't react to it. I can't. He's doing stuff that I need to be able to block or parry and I can't do it. Because, yeah, his connection sucks, but he gets away with it. Look, he gets away with lockdown shit that you should not be able to get away with. I parried that. I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I can't react to what he's doing. I just wake up, but it comes out late. So this guy's an asshole. He sucks. He literally has a bad connection. He just fucking does pattern Remy shit. You can't react to it. It's not safe. It's not fucking good gameplay at all. It's trash gameplay. I can't do anything about it because I'm online. Fucking idiot. You gotta love the fucking online exclusive players. Pick the worst characters, play shitty, and get away with it. You can't do anything about it online, so it's so lame.